meeting will come to order. We've got members with obligations all over the place, so we may have quorum troubles today. First bill for consideration is Senate File 128, approval of charter schools. I don't see the sponsor, so I will explain what the bill does. It's quite simple. We were limited by the deal that got the charter school bills through. We're limited in statute to 3 authorized by the statewide authorizer, which is changed now. And those 3 have been authorized. We've got more that are organizing. There's one in Star Valley, hence Senator Dockstader. It's in his district. They want to do it. But there will be a few more we're aware of. They're starting to work, and some of them will probably come to fruition. So the purpose of the bill is you couldn't authorize any more prior to July 1, 2026. We've changed that to July 1, 2024 in the bill, and gone from the bill on page 2, line 14, authorizes us to get 1 additional in that period. And we're going to propose an amendment to take that to 3. We don't want to blow the thing wide open, but we do want to start to have some regular progress on it. I think that'll work best for everybody. So that's the bill. Who wants to be first in testifying? Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Excuse me, Senator Dockstader, we just introduced the bill and said basically what it does. Do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing that. You know what it does, Mr. Chairman. I apologize coming from the governor's prayer breakfast over here. Thank you. Looking for your full support. Essentially, we've got more than 1 school in the mix. Mr. Chairman, I'm just asking that we expedite the process. This is a good system we have with these potential schools. It opens up a door in several communities that didn't offer possibilities. Mine is one of them. It doesn't work in one case to build a new school or to go north or to go south. And we've actually formed a committee to create a charter school. They're well on their way. Somewhere we can't do specific legislation to one community, but somewhere along the way we got to expedite this, Mr. Chairman, get things rolling. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Office.
Thank you. Before my chairman and the other committee I'm supposed to be in leaves. Mr. Chairman, I do have a question about this. We have a charter school process through local approving authority with working with the school districts. I have 2 of those charter schools. They're quite successful. They work well. Is that a route that has been explored for
Yes.
your charter school? And so it's already been rejected.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the charter school system we have in place reviewed the bill. They gave it their nod of approval with a majority vote, 1 exception. And they were behind this piece of legislation as well. And that's the route we're going. And we're going to do all this through the right process, working through that board. But at this time, we're getting ready to move. And I'd like to have things in place should we get to that point that we're ready to go, whether it's for my school or anybody's school across the state.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. No, I don't think that's quite what I meant. Your school board for your school district.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, we would be going through the charting system at the state level. That's what they've requested.
Right. And Mr. Chairman, that's what I was asking about. Was there any attempt to go through the traditional format instead of needing this legislation? I mean, we've allowed charter schools for as long as I've been in the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, they've approached our local board. At this time, there wasn't immediate enthusiasm, but So we felt like discussing with this community committee that's been formed, that we would go through the state process, through the charting board of the state process.
Okay, thank you.
We're exploring all options.
Bit of experience that some school districts will not authorize charters. And you also have the potential in some of these areas for community jealousies involved.
Mr.
So,
Chairman, go ahead.
with that, give us your name and proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Wanda Maloney with the Department of Education. I'm here speaking on behalf of Superintendent Degenfelder. In response to this bill, she is in support. There is the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board in place, in which they've approved the 3 charter schools that are functioning and in place. And she believes that we would have the staff and the support to be able to continue with this process.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Give us your name. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. My name is John Masters. I am the chairman of the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. At a meeting we held on Monday, after a lively discussion, including whether one was sufficient, we also support the bill. We feel like, although we're just starting out, we're ready to rock and roll, as they say. So I would also express my support and ask you to do likewise. Any questions, I'd be happy to address.
Committee, any questions? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate brevity this day. It's the last day we've got. WEA.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. I think a bit of context is important here. When the legislature voted to expand charter schools in the state of Wyoming, and the reason why that date was put in place was to understand what impact charter schools might have on local school districts, students, teachers. And I think that that's something that we've yet to see. I think especially in communities like Chugwater, in our rural communities, understanding what impact charter schools might have on those local districts is a worthy cause. I think the only other thing I'd like to bring to the attention of the committee is one of those implications that we saw after the authorizing of those 3 is this is a cost escalator for education. Those 3 charter schools that were authorized was the single largest cost increased escalator in K-12 funding for a while. So just a bit of context, and with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Ruffus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Tate, you may not have this information. I was looking around to see if anyone might, but the supposition that districts are hostile to charter schools through the traditional process, we hear that narrative, but I'm just curious if there's actually any data on the number of applications that have been fully prepared throughout the state over the past decade and longer, and how many of those have been accepted versus rejected. This tends to be narrative driven as opposed to data driven, and I'm curious if you've seen that data.
Chairman Scott, Senator Rothfuss, I have seen that data. I don't have it in front of me. My recollection is that there were hardly any, if any at all, that have been rejected. Okay. I can get that data though for you.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say just a couple of things. From our perspective, the limit was more in the order of just a straight old-fashioned political compromise deal. It does slow it down so that we don't go hog wild on it rapidly. It has that benefit, but it was a straight political deal. The information I have is that in a number of communities, the local board was known to be sufficiently hostile to charters that people didn't apply. And that's a matter of judgment on that. So thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, sir, in the back.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeff Darty. I'm here on behalf of the town of Alpine. I just wanted to let you know, for those who aren't familiar with me, I have an earlier part of my career, I spent time planning and designing and building schools in various places around the state. The town of Alpine is, to the best of my knowledge, the fastest growing city in the state. And as a result of that, they're struggling. And as a result of that, the whole school district up there is struggling as well. So they formed a committee, as you heard earlier, and on that committee are members of the community, educators. We have a school board member that's also a participant in that community, and they've asked me to look at two different things for them. They've asked me to look at a public school path, and they've asked me to look at a charter school path. So this today is in service to that charter school path. And I want to let you know that the community is very engaged in this process, and they are working to raise the money to build this school. They're trying to fund about a $20 million cover on the construction of this school up there. They understand that this slot, and if there are more, are not guaranteed to them, that there's a process that they have to go through in order to be afforded the opportunity to proceed with a charter school up there. So I just want to let you know that they understand that that will be awarded based on the strength of their proposal as compared to others that may be submitted to the Charter School Authorizing Board as well. The thing I do want to let you know is, absent this bill, they don't have that option. And they need to move forward with the school in the community. They also have been evaluating charter school options that may be a fit for the community, one of which is out of Salt Lake City. And they believe that that charter school can deliver education for about $10,000, $11,000, much less than the ADM that's presently afforded to that part of the state. So this, if they end up going that route, may be a significant savings to the state. If they were to go a public school path, as this body knows, that path is going to take them 6 to 8 years to be able to realize a school in that community. And that's a long time for that to happen. But that is one of the options that they are asking me to pursue for them. The state, as you heard from the previous speaker, imposed a moratorium for solid reasons. I think this bill is a thoughtful way to address that moratorium in a way, as the chairman indicates, doesn't throw the gates wide open. And I'll just leave you with this. So when I was tasked with building schools within the state, it was always important to me to remind my staff why we do it. It's not just to build a building. It's our job to satisfy the spatial needs of kiddos in our state. And education has changed a lot since I went to school. It used to be a very industrial style, teacher standing at the front of 25 kids, presenting the educational curriculum. And now it's really dynamic. It's pull-out spaces, it's collaborative spaces. It's changed a lot in this just a couple of years since I graduated from high school. So with that, I would tell you that delivering a good education is the most important thing we can do for our young people, right? That drives the post-secondary options that are available to them, whether that's a tech ed type program that they want to pursue, or whether it's a college. And that drives the kind of jobs that they're going to get, the kind of neighborhoods they're going to live in, and the quality of life that they're going to enjoy at the end of this. So it's really important that we don't push this can down the road. Those kiddos need some help now, and it's about changing lives. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Senator Office.
Thank you. Mr. Daugherty, has this organization approached the school board and had this conversation to find out whether the school board would be amenable to what is not currently against the law, a traditional charter school path within the school district?
Chairman Scott. Senator Rothfuss, I can tell you this, that the school board member that's been a part of this effort to get a charter school in the community has taken this back to the school board. He tells me, I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, so I will tell you what he told me, that he has taken it to the school board and feels like he has sufficient support for this process. I don't know whether he's described the process that you have or not to them, but he's certainly described this process to them, and he indicates to me that he has a sufficient level of support to get the board on board with it.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I don't understand why the local school board would support the statewide authorizer over the local authorizer. The local authorizer provides full flexibility already for negotiation between the district and the board, and we have plenty of schools, not a tremendous amount, but we've got schools in the state of Wyoming that have used that model. There's no barrier. You can start a year ago on this process. I don't understand why this legislation right now is the key to that path when there is an untried path available.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I just don't have that answer for you.
Okay.
I'm happy to take it to him and get back to you, but I just don't have the
Sure.
answer to what conversations he's had with the board and why.
Great, thank you. And honestly, if you want to call me up and chat about it and have them do the same about how those options currently exist and talk to folks in my school district that have successfully navigated that process twice, I'm happy to work with you on that. Mr. Chairman, where do the students currently go and how many students are we talking about?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I have part of that. I'm going to be completely honest with you and let you know that they contracted with me just a couple of days before this session starts. So there's a lot of work and a lot of understanding that
Gotcha.
I need to go. But I will tell you, in general, the kiddos go to Etna. The younger ones do. And then the older students are going up to Afton to the middle school and the high school up there.
Gotcha, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else, Mr. Carrot?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Ken DeCarry of the Wyoming School Boards Association, and I want to express some concerns that we have with this piece of legislation. Mr. Chairman, I think more than just a political compromise, that bill, it was a way to see how these charter schools are going to function. Are they going to save money? That was in the original, I know the original proposal said, well, this won't cost any more money, which we found out wasn't accurate because that was a misunderstanding in the way we fund schools in the state of Wyoming. We don't fund it on a per pupil basis. We form it on a school basis. So every school you open is going to add to the cost. The other part of that was how would they perform? I mean, that's what we want to look at also is, are these students going to do better than in the K-12 system? Mr. Chairman, quite honestly, this is like we're fixing this airplane as we fly it, because there's a bill in this session to fix problems with the original legislation. And so we haven't even got the legislation completely right up to this point as far as doing that. So, I mean, hurrying down the road when we're not even sure about the fixes, I think is problematic. As Senator Rothfuss has been pointing out, Mr. Chairman, there is another process. I mean, you're not talking that there isn't a way to open a charter school. We have a couple communities in the state that have charter schools. And you just go to the local school board and you run this through. And Mr. Chairman, I guess our other concern with that would be, so what you're doing is you're going to an appointed board instead of locally elected officials to make a decision on educating students. And Mr. Chairman, I know in lots of other areas around this body, that would cause some concern if you went around locally elected officials with an appointed board in order to make these decisions. Mr. Chairman, I think the other parts also are, as we're looking at the legislation that's floating around in this session, is like who is going to be ultimately responsible, if there are problems. So, Mr. Chairman, we just wanted to bring those concerns forward, and we're not really sure that this is needed at this time. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Once, going twice. Public testimony is closed. Do I hear a motion on the bill? Bill's been moved. Discussion amendments. I'm going to propose one amendment on page 2, line 14. It provides for not more than one additional charter school. I think it is much better to have a slightly larger figure. This is not special legislation. We're trying to accommodate needs across the whole state. And I think making this option available to a few more would be good. And I would propose taking the 1 to 3. That won't open the floodgates, but it will allow a few others to develop, and it will get our process going nicely with the new authorizing board and give people some opportunity, because I think we are seeing some push for charter schools and communities where the local school board is in need of some competition. And we're also seeing some of these rural areas get caught up in some of the community jealousies that are involved. That provides, charter schools provide an option for them. So I would move that we change the number on page 2, line 14 from 1 to 3.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ruffus.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just note that that's outside the scope of the title. I don't know that that will matter, but the first sentence is pretty clear. An act modifying the date for approval of one charter school by the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board, correcting a typographical error and providing for an effective date. Now, Mr. Chairman, if you're contemplating that perhaps the 1 is a typographical error and it should be a 3, it is within the title. But outside of that, it's outside the title.
I think if we can authorize 1, we can authorize 3. And we would have to amend the title of the LSO.
I don't agree, and I suspected that we would disagree. So I'll be a no on that and on the bill.
Okay.
That'd sure be a fun constitutional challenge, though, when it's explicit in the title like that.
Okay. Any further discussion on that, committee? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, that carried. Anything further on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, briefly. So, Mr. Chairman, obviously there was a lot of work that went into the authorizing bill for this, and as you noted, this was a key provision of the bill that was the compromise that led to it having support, was ensuring that rather than just diving in, this would proceed forward and have the opportunity to sort of test for problems and see what the implications would be. We've already seen some of those implications early on, but the schools haven't even opened yet. And so it's a little premature to be assuming that everything is working and that we don't continue to need a little bit of a pause. This pause and the delay is to ensure that it's in the best interest of the state. When we talked about this before, the assumption obviously was that this would be disregarded and that we would immediately come back this year and open the floodgates as quickly as we possibly could. So here's that moment, as expected. I think it's a bad idea. I don't think I've got the votes or the potential to persuade anyone, but I just think it's important to note that this is exactly contrary to the discussion when the bill passed of what we would do and how we would proceed. Exactly contrary. And here we are, knowing full well that we would go against that. We're going against that. And it's nonetheless disappointing, despite expected. With that, I'll be a no vote. And Mr. Chairman, I do have to leave to go to the same committee that he's going to run to right after this. So as I depart, please recognize that I'll leave a couple of votes, and
Okay.
thank you very much,
That's
Mr. Chairman.
fine, that's in accordance. I will say one thing, the charter school in Casper is operating, has about 200, between 230, 250 students, and I'm getting good reports from the parents, but, you know, this is a process, and it'll take a while to prove out things, and that is clear, but we are operating. Okay? Anything further? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, on Senate File 128, approval of charter school, Senator Brightman. Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss.
No.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
Aye.
4 aye, 1 no.
Okay, cue that will go forward, you're welcome. School, Senate File 86, School Safety and Security Funding. Cobb, you're on.
Good morning, Senate Education Committee, Chairman and members. I'm here to explain Senate File 86. It's a pretty simple bill. It creates a school property, firearms and school property account. The authorization comes from, or the ability to spend that money comes from a state statute, 21-3-132C, Romanet III, A, and B. And this is about the ability to fund that statute that we've already authorized. It's a mechanism to let schools do this if they please. It's totally an optional thing. They will make that decision, but it is a way for them to fund this if they so choose for firearms and firearm training for the people and students, however they wish to comply with the rules for that funding. And that's about it, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I will stand for questions. I will say that I have another committee I'm supposed to probably be in simultaneously, so I'll try to stay as long as possible to answer questions, but respectfully, I can't be in two places at once. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This time of the session, you're lucky to only be two places at once. Questions for Senator? Let me ask one, what's the source of the funding? It's continuous appropriation. What's the source of the funding?
Shall be included in Departments of Education's standard budget.
Mr. Chairman, I think I can answer that.
Is that
Yes, I understand that.
On your fiscal note, it says this bill appropriates $100,000 from the school foundation program account. To the firearms on school property account. That would, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question.
Certainly.
Did you think about possibly just leaving that in the school foundation program account and not creating another account and just allowing that to be, distributed from the school foundation program account? What was the rationale of making another account?
probably, Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, to really give clear indication that there is an account with money in it that they can use. So it's not cluttered up, it's not buried in something. They could do it currently, and this was just more overt mechanism for having the monies available for that training.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Senator Reitman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill to us. Walk us through the process of how this would work so that the school district would vote to, sponsor training for anybody that wishes to partake, and then they could do the training wherever they prefer and then go get reimbursed after the fact. Is that what you're thinking here and how it's going to go down?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Brightman. Yes, it's going to be driven by the local school boards, their decision on just what they want to do. On page 3, beginning line 1, and going down to, let's see, it could be about 12. It explains the process of getting reimbursed from the state. So it's a complete process. It's just dovetailing into an existing state statute that allows this to happen. And it's merely a funding mechanism and a way to get reimbursement for said funds. I hope I answered your question, Senator Brightman.
Understand me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could help out a little, I'm a co-sponsor on the bill, and I appreciate this good piece of legislation. Just a little clarification, this is continuing work from Representative Eklund's bill. I believe we were in the House together when we passed that. And he provided that for the school districts to be able to arm personnel in the school districts if they chose and if they worked with law enforcement to put that program in place. However, there was no funding for continuing training, which is required. So I think this is a really important bill that fixes kind of a discrepancy we left in the law when we passed that good piece of legislation back then, for especially for our outlying schools. You know, sometimes we have schools in town where the police are right there, or we have schools that are large enough to have a security officer there. But in these smaller schools, this is an option that is critically important for them, and just providing a funding piece so that it's not a drain on their resources, or a teacher or a custodian or someone in that school district who chooses to participate should not be responsible to then fund the training of themselves. So I think that's what the bill does, and I commend you for bringing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Senator Steinmetz.
Anything else? Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Can I be excused?
Yes,
Mr.
yes,
Chairman?
you may. We-
All right. Well, thank you very much
we
for hearing
understand the pressures this time of the
the
session.
information, and may we all have a good day. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, testimony in the bill. State Department of Education, you want to testify on this one? No. Okay. Anybody who wants to be first? Any testimony? Any testimony? Mr. Winnie?
Mr. Chairman, in response to Senator Steinmetz's comments about schools that may be distant, if you haven't visited the 4J school up south of Gillette, you don't know how distant a school can be from communities. It is so distant from communities, it's serving the ranches there. The state provides housing for the faculty, 4 houses for the school. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Questions? Thank you very much. It's interesting information. This is a big state. It's significantly bigger than all of New England. Anybody else? Anybody else? Seeing no further testimony, public testimony is closed. Do I hear a motion of the bill?
Move the bill.
Bill's been moved. Any further discussion? Any amendments needed? Seeing none. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, on Senate File 86, School Safety and Security Funding, Senator Beitman? Aye. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss has left an absentee vote of no. Senator Steinmetz?
Aye.
Chairman Scott?
Aye.
4 aye, 1 no.
Okay, that's carried. Next bill for our consideration is the Senate Joint Resolution 5, which is the School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment. And I'm the sponsor on it with the members of the committee here present as co-sponsors. I will go through and explain the bill. It is a constitutional amendment. It's designed to give us a different system for funding school capital construction. It has a predecessor to it. It's passed the Senate once, 3-4 years ago, and didn't get anywhere in the House. And it is a constitutional amendment because what we're seeking to do is overturn the system that the Campbell decisions gave us, and it takes a constitutional amendment to do that. And basically, my perception of what's wrong with the current system is that they gave us a pork barrel system for funding the public schools. We have spent, if I remember my figures correctly, over $3 billion since that decision. And you can make your own judgment as to how much of that was worthwhile. And I know in judging my community, we built more than the community would have supported under the old system. And it's very nice, but it is pretty well gold-plated. And we threw away a number of old schools, one of which is now serving as a charter school. We were able to get it for that purpose. And at the time of the Campbell decision, they identified a number of deficiencies in the state that needed to be remedied and that weren't being. And part of that, good part of that, was the school districts that had the lower assessed valuation. And we are unusual as a state in having the degree of variation in assessed valuation that we've got from one district to the next. But the ones with the lower assessed valuation couldn't afford to build some of the new schools they really did need, and ran up against the constitutional debt limits. So we have to handle that, and this amendment does handle that, and I'll show you that. So the Supreme Court decision was not irrational, given the Constitution as they found it. So the solution has to change the Constitution. So that's why it's a constitutional amendment. I won't pay attention to either the introductory material or the ballot statement, but we'll take you through the language very specifically. Legislature, starting on page 2, this is the actual language will go into the Constitution, new section 24 to Article 7. Legislature shall by law provide a system of public school capital construction subject to the following. Number 1, the local school districts shall be primarily responsible for providing school facilities through bonds or other means. This is what explicitly overturns Campbell decision. Said this is primarily a state responsibility. This takes it back to the system we had always had, that it's a local responsibility. Second, decision of voters in an election authorizing capital expenditure for public school capital construction, however financed, shall be final. And neither a school district or the state shall be required to fund any capital expenditure rejected by the voters. That's means exactly what it said. This is part of the overturning of the Campbell decision, that the voters are what counts. Cost of paying bonds and interest shall be equalized. And this is what we've not seen before on a systematic basis, so that the required district mill levy does not exceed what the mill levy would be if the district had an assessed valuation equal to the state average per person assessed valuation, with the applicable federal census information being used to determine the number of persons. Equalization may be provided for school capital construction financed by other means. So we're primarily going to be a bond issue system, but it's open to getting things financed other ways. I have specifically heard people from Teton County say, in their county, optional sales tax would make more sense than perhaps the property levy. And that would be up to the authorizing legislation and then presumably be a local choice. But we'd have to consider the legislation there. This is the constitutional basis for it. And we don't go into, it is not wise in writing Constitution to go into great detail. That provision is authorized, but would have to depend on the implementing legislation. So we're going to equalize to what the average is across the state. It does mean that the districts with very high assessed valuation will be able to do things a little cheaper in terms of what their voters will be stuck with. We recapture them on other things. This would be give a little more balance to the system. On page 3, line 5, financing of the equalization may include appropriations or dedicated sources of funds. So those are clearly options that the legislature will have and shall include, if necessary. So there's a default here. If the legislature doesn't come through to fund the equalization, a statewide mill levy at a rate to ensure payment of the equalization. So we would essentially contemplate the method that is always used locally to determine the mill levy. You've got to pay the bonds, you've got to pay your share of them in this case. You set the mill levy accordingly based on what the assessed valuation is. That's a system that has worked on a local basis since statehood. And it's the way you have to do it. And if you do not have this backup provision, no bonding council in their right mind will give approval to tell anybody it's safe to invest in those bonds. You've got to have a surefire funding mechanism. Compliance with the debt limitation imposed by Article 16, Section 5 of this Constitution shall be determined using only the school district share of the payment for the debt. That's a provision, I think, that does require this constitutional provision. There is that limitation in there. We don't want to repeal the limitation. We want to just apply to the locally responsible portion of the debt. That's what's relevant to the limitation. So that takes care of that problem. That was one of the reasons, I think, Supreme Court decided Campbell the way they did. Because without that, you can't, some of the districts, probably including your districts and Ms. Steinmetz, don't have the assessed valuation to fund what's needed. Okay, legislature shall provide a system to determine which facilities are not needed for education and therefore not subject to equalization. Historically, I think we will see a debate over school pools when we write the implementation of legislation on that. There's going to be some facilities that are useful for schools and for the community as a whole. And we'll have to deal with that statutorily because there'll always be that question. And I don't want to put more detail in the Constitution. It's too hard to change. That'll be a statutory thing. And item 6 is there, legislature may appropriate funds to relieve hardship. School district loses a school to a tornado or a flood or fire. We may have to deal with that. And we have done that a few times over the years. That does happen. So that's the system. You can see the ballot statement on the next page, but that's I took you through the whole language because that's what's key in the Constitution. Again, my perspective is the current system is bust because our way of financing it has failed. There's been some other problems with the current system, but we can't finance it right now. So this will allow for creation of school bond debt and higher mill levies. No question about it, we solved the problem. But it'll be mill levies that the local people who really know what's needed for their schools get to decide on. And frankly, I watched this system. I've been a resident of the state of Wyoming my whole life. And I've watched this system, and it, in a district with sort of intermediate, pretty average means, the system worked. And when the schools really needed it, the voters said yes. And when the schools didn't really need it, the voters said no. So that's the amendment. We're open to public testimony. We'll start out by asking the State Department of Education, do they want to comment on this? Okay. Seeing none, who wants to be first on this? Wyoming Education Association.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tate Mullen, Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. So in those Campbell decisions, they recognized that school facilities, school capital construction is a necessary component of an adequate education. It does impact how we provide that education. The reason that they moved away from that system is there were equity issues. As we have noted, we've seen those equity issues across the state in communities where they cannot generate the needed revenue to build their facilities or to provide the funding necessary for operations. This will revert us back to a problem of equity issues. To the good senator's point, this does put it in the voters' hands, but that doesn't diminish the need for the state to provide that adequate and equitable education where school facilities and capital construction are a component. Whether those locales decide to raise the revenue through mill levies still doesn't alleviate the state's obligation to pay for those so that we can provide adequate and equitable education for our students in those communities. It's a concern that we have. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Committee? I will say that what this does is there will be, everybody will have to pay at least what they would pay if it was state average. And I think that will work. That's a matter of judgment. I will ask you a question on, we're starting to take money for school capital construction out of the school foundation program, out of the operating money. And one of my fears is that we will rob the operating funding for capital construction, and there'll be a competition there that will, because frankly, I think what goes on in the building is much more important than the building itself. That's been my experience. Does the Wyoming Education Association share that fear as we start to use the school foundation program to fund capital construction?
Chairman Scott, we do share that concern. When we saw there really hasn't been, and we had given testimony last year in terms of a dedicated funding mechanism for capital construction or school facilities, that we're really kind of lacking in those regards, especially with the diminished minerals that we're seeing in the state. When we saw that now operations and capital construction, it would create a competition, and that is a concern because we do have an obligation to fund both, and there is a concern that it turns into a competition. However, I don't think that in our position in that concern doesn't justify reverting back to a system that raises equity issues again.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Senator Steinmetz.
Yes, I just have one question. Why is the Education Association opposed to taxpayers deciding what level they want to fund schools at and how they want to fund capital construction?
Senator Scott, Senator Steinmetz, we're not opposed to districts raising those revenues that they need. I think Albany County is a good example of, if there's something additional that they would like for their school facilities, they have put that to the voters. They have done that. But there is a baseline that we need to be well aware of in terms of what constitutes an adequate facility for our students. And what we saw prior to, and Chairman Scott alluded to this, was that there were communities that were unable to generate those revenues, and those buildings are failing those students, and it fails that standard of adequate and equitable. So as long as we're hitting that baseline and looking at, what are the pieces, the components of that building that our students need in the context of a modern and adequate education when it comes to facilities, if we're hitting that baseline and anything additional a district wants to do, say for a pool or something along those lines, we have no problem with the district and the local citizens making that judgment call. But we need to ensure that that baseline is met before we do that.
Clarification.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you very much. Who wants to be next? Anybody? Mr. Zakaria, School Board Association.
Mr. Chairman, Ken Carey, Wyoming School Boards Association. I have a little bit different take on this. The problem, and we are opposed to this piece of legislation, but the reason why is what you're going to do is you're going to set up two separate classes of taxpayers. So the people that have been, their tax dollars have been going to fund all these buildings in communities, and those buildings are built, they're going to be treated differently than somebody now has the opportunity to raise their own taxes, still paying the money for the other buildings, but also paying for the buildings that they need. And so it just seems to me inequitable. This might be a fair idea once you've gotten through the list of the buildings that needed to be built, but we're not there yet. And in fact, that has slowed down tremendously in the last few years as far as those buildings. And Mr. Chairman, the other problem that I have is what you're going to do is you're going to take it, the legislature spent a lot of time in this session about property taxes. And now you're going to take a measure to the citizens whether they want to raise property taxes for schools. And I mean, I think that puts them in a pretty hard spot as far as what they're doing. So, Mr. Chairman, we would like to see it at least get through the construction with all of that. Mr. Chairman, you talked about your community, and those schools were all built. This community is a little different. They have a lot of schools that didn't get built and need to be built. And so they're going to be at a disadvantage as far as what's going forward. Either they don't build the schools or they pay for those schools when they've been a part of paying for all the other schools through the state of Wyoming. And with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to stand for questions.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeCaria, I see what you're saying, but I look at Campbell County and I look at Rock Springs and I look at Jackson. If this were in place a couple of years ago, they'd be already probably breaking ground and building those schools that they desperately want and need. Our current system has failed because it's politicized. And if we waited until every school that's on the list got built, this will never happen. And we'll be stuck in this system forever that the courts gave us. We didn't legislate this. It was mandated to us by a Supreme Court. Most of them aren't even on the court anymore. And so, I think eventually the Campbell cases will go the way of Dred Scott and on the ash heap of history, and we'll get back to the legislature being able to legislate, local communities being able to decide for themselves whether or not they want to build a new school. So do you see this constant cycle of new buildings ever that list is never going to get done? So if that's our excuse for not doing this, it's just, wouldn't you agree that it would never happen because that list is so long?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, when I talk about the list, it's the, that list has every building in the state of Wyoming on it. And some of those have actually been built, but, the needs index, every school ends up on that list. I'm talking about the schools that are old that need to be replaced, and we know those need to be replaced. Some buildings, are 50 years old, and so those are ones in the mix. And people, I think we're fairly patient, saying, yeah, they'll eventually get around to doing this, and they haven't been there up to this point. Mr. Chairman, when I first, when this Campbell's decision first came out, the issue was existing debt, and then the state took on all new construction, and the same problem applied. If you didn't take in the existing debt with future debt, what you're asking is certain taxpayers to pay for their buildings and to pay for other people's buildings. And I think that's where the problem lies in this particular constitutional amendment, Mr. Chairman.
One more.
Okay, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just continually a little bit caught off guard and quite frankly disturbed by the distrust we have in the taxpaying public that they can't make these decisions for themselves, or that they are going to see the system as someone else got something they didn't. I think most of the people I talk to see the need to make a change. We know that our co-lease bonuses are gone now, and we understand that we've benefited from that for a long time, but now we need to reevaluate how things are being done. And so I guess I'm just wondering why the distrust of the citizens in voting on this issue.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, I don't think it's a distrust. I just think it comes down to an equity issue as far as what people have to do. And so, we know that there are buildings that need to be made. I mean, if you looked at that list, you could tell who's going to have to put a bond election forward, right out of the gate. And so you can see who those taxpayers are that are going to have to vote to raise their own taxes in order to build a building when, other schools in the state were built, in a different manner. And Mr. Chairman, I hear about the co-lease bonus money a lot as far as the way we built schools. Mr. Chairman, I was in the legislature when we passed that original legislation. And at that time, the discussion was, we know this is not a permanent source of revenue. Sometime we're going to have to find a more sustainable source of revenue in order to do school construction. And Mr. Chairman, we haven't actually. So it's one of those discussions that, was great in theory, but didn't work out in practice.
Now, and this is the proposal. Okay. Who wants to be next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
We are starting to run short of time, and I don't want to filibuster the bill that comes behind it.
Good morning, my name is Catherine Mead. I'm a trustee of Teton County Board of Trustees, and I'm a student of history. Our founding fathers in the state of Wyoming put every nickel they had towards education. There was no money at the time, but every dime, every source of funding they had, they put towards education. Obviously, they were very enlightened and realized that that was gonna be what helped our state grow. So at that time, under the Equal Footing Act, we got 2 sections of land in every township in the state of Wyoming. 3.1 million acres still exist in the school trust land library. That is a source of funding for building schools. But our state has treated school trust lands that are owned by the children, really, as, everybody's property. It is not. The state has a fiduciary obligation to maximize returns to the school trust through the sales of school trust land or the development as well. So when people say that, well, we don't have another source of funding, we do. I think people don't understand, the general public, that school trust lands are not just to enable people to have an additional hunting property or whatever, but they really were intended by the federal government as under the equal footing doctrine, equal equity, they're the same words, to give each state the opportunity to liquidate those funds, increase the tax base, which would also obviously help schools, by giving all the states this loan. It's a fantastic thing, and Wyoming has been so enlightened in education. Not very long ago, we put in place a Hathaway Scholarship. This legislature, a fantastic thing that other states would, really be fortunate to have. We have done so many great things, and the Campbell County case, people sort of poo-poo it, but that was a great thing for education in Wyoming. So my school district, this constitutional amendment, which I doubt will pass the public, but give it a try, wouldn't hurt my community in the least, because education in my community is one of the most important things. People came to Teton County, Wyoming versus Teton County, Idaho, because Teton County, Idaho, while the land was cheaper, and it has the views of the Tetons. We say it's the backwards view. They say it's the frontwards view. It's just the opposite. It's like a mirror. Beautiful place, but their schools did not work. And year after year after year, they would have a bond election. And year after year after year, the folks over there would not improve their schools. And it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that they actually started building some schools, and that resulted in huge growth for them. So, those mirror images of Teton County, Wyoming, where Wyoming has been at the forefront of education in the West, and Idaho has not, just gives you a real example of the importance to Wyoming of continuing this legacy of schools and putting a lot of money into schools and our kids. So whether, I think it's a great idea, with the idea that you would go to the public in each district to decide what to build for schools. You want to go to the state to decide whether that's a good idea. We'll see what the taxpayers do. But I urge you not to feel that the schools are an albatross around the neck of the legislature. They are not. They are the best thing that this legislature, I feel like, has done in the last 20 years. And the Campbell County case was part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? We're running short on time here. Anybody else? Anybody else? Seeing none, public testimony is closed. Do I hear a motion on the bill? Motion is due pass. Any proposals for amendments? Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, for your Senate Joint Resolution Number 5, School Capital Construction Constitutional Amendment. Senator Bateman? Aye. Senator Brennan?
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss has left an absentee vote of no. Senator Steinmetz?
Aye.
Chairman Scott?
Aye.
4 aye, 1 no.
Okay, thank you very much. Next bill for our consideration is Senate, and the last Senate file for our consideration is Senate File Number 95, Teacher Tenure Senator Hicks, and let me say, for Senator Hicks and for the others that were not able to be here, he got caught by other duties when we had this bill posted 2 days ago. And we got a very brief explanation based on the title, which is what I could do very quickly. And we had considerable public testimony, both for and notably, there was one for, and a number of the organizations were against. So we partway through the public testimony. Senator Hicks, your bill, tell us what it does and why we ought to do it. And audience, I'm going to cut this off about 9:45 if we don't get it done before then, and just vote, because we're going to run out of time.
So, Chairman Scott, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on Senate File 168. I don't remember that. Let's see the number on that, Mr. Chairman. 95.
95.
Been doing a lot of bills lately, Mr. Chairman. Anyway, just a little background, the nature of this. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I've been a public employee for 33 years in my professional career here in the state of Wyoming. I work for a local government entity. In that capacity, I work with almost every state agency, every local agency, and every federal agency. And Mr. Chairman, I share an office with several federal agencies and several local agencies, and so on a daily basis, I interact with almost every level of government employee, local, state, and federal. Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of any other place in local or state governments when we afford a level of guaranteed contract employment that is currently the practice for continuing teachers. As it states in the law, Mr. Chairman, there is a duty of school boards to employ. So if you go to page 4, it says a continuing contract teacher shall be employed by each school district. So page 4, 21-7-104, on a continuing basis from year to year without annual contract renewal. Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any other public employee in the state of Wyoming that's afforded that guaranteed contract right. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to talk about, because often we hear, well, you don't understand. And so, Mr. Chairman, I spent 22 years of my life married to a veteran classroom teacher in the state of Wyoming. Spent 33 years in the classroom teaching junior high kids. This is not the first time this bill or some version of this bill's come up, and I actually remember the first time that we debated this in the Senate. My wife at the time was sitting on the floor, and quite frankly, she was astounded that the Wyoming legislature didn't pass it at that time. Because as she conferred to me, she says, it never felt at one time in her 30 years was her employment ever jeopardized, ever. Her perspective on the situation as it exists with these guaranteed contracts, that it was a disincentive, particularly for young teachers coming into the situation where you have veteran teachers in a school district that for whatever reason have lost the passion to teach, or just trying to get through the last couple of years of their contract. She said it was so destructive to those teachers that are coming into the system that get there at 6:30 in the morning and don't leave at 5 o'clock at night. And just like my wife used to sit on the couch at 8 till 9 o'clock at night grading papers. And she said, what's destructive is when you have all of these teachers that are coming in, the new teachers that we're recruiting and coming up through the process, and they see 1 or 2 teachers in the whole building that are just skating, that they don't show up early, they leave early, not working in the best interest of the kids. She felt that was a very destructive process. So, Mr. Chairman, this is not an anti-teacher bill. This is just a fair and equitable employment bill. If we pass this legislation out of this body, it still affords more protections for classroom teachers than any other state or local employee would have today, if we pass this. So it's not anti-teachers. And Mr. Chairman, when we contemplated this before, I had a discussion with several superintendents, and I said, what's the ramification of us passing this bill? He said, basically, in a district of 140-some teachers at the time, he says, we would probably not renew contracts for one or two. So the question always becomes, well, you can already do that. Well, they can, but I live in a very rural area, and we have a high turnover rate of school administration. So one principal comes in and goes out. And so ultimately what happens is they have to learn which are the high-performing teachers and which are just the few, the 1 or 2% that are underperforming. And so we never have an opportunity to develop what I would say is an administrative record to be able to make the case to be able that these teachers just wouldn't be renewed contract. So, Mr. Chairman, the only thing we're trying to do is provide fair and equitable employment opportunities across the spectrum for all government employees. And my guess is with the current environment we have now, this is just a tool that will actually get better teachers in the classroom quicker and give those local school boards and those superintendents the ability to do that. So, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions to the committee.
Committee, any questions? Questions? Let me ask one then. My early career experience, I worked 5 years for the federal government in Washington, D.C. One point was running inherited the budget office for the EPA water programs. We had an individual in the office who was a GS-13, pretty high up in the federal system. And my understanding is he had been an alcoholic and had cured his alcoholism, but it had cost him his professional ability to function. And the previous management had him just reading magazines in the back room. The system to get rid of him, I would have had to give him real responsibilities, see them fail, done my best to counsel him, and it would have taken a year to get through the legal system, where that would have been a major obsession in my career. My point of view is I had, as a manager, much better things to do with my time. So we put him to work updating charts in the Management Information Center, except when it was important that it be right. The GS5 secretary did it, not this guy. And the system, theoretically, you could get rid of a non-performing employee, but the legal process was such that it was a unwise allocation of the manager's time most of the time. It just didn't happen. Are we facing that kind of a problem in the schools, or is our problem much less? I've seen had little experience here in Wyoming suggest to me that it is possible if you have someone who's just not functioning.
So Chairman Scott.
How do we compare with the federal system that it was?
Yeah, so the scenario you described is real. It absolutely happens, and it tends to happen with somebody that's, maybe a couple of years from retirement, or know they're going to change careers anyway. And so I've seen this happen in school districts in the state of Wyoming, where they'll just kind of do exactly what you said, try to mitigate the damage to the students, and that's what they do. It's much more costly and it's much more difficult to try to remove that teacher because of the continuing contract rights. Let me express that again, the contract rights that they currently have from employment. So typically, in my experiences, is what the districts do is exactly what you described with your colleague back in your formative days as a federal employee. Is we just minimize the damage to the extent that within a year or two, it'll go away. But that is a real situation that has occurred with different districts across the state of Wyoming.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else want to testify in this bill? Yes, sir, in the back. And please give us your name and who you're with, if you're associated with somebody. And
Chairman Scott, I'm Richard Lennox and retired teacher. And I just want to offer just a little color and history, which I think you will appreciate. And I'll keep it as brief. I wrote it so it's pretty brief. In 2008, I transferred to Cajon High School in San Bernardino. Cajon had a reputation of excellence in academics and athletics. It was the premier high school in the district. It also had the cowboy as a mascot. The cowboy mascot, as we know, is quite iconic. One vice principal summed it up well: once a cowboy, always a cowboy. The lore of the cowboy infiltrated the culture and climate of the school as it does in the cowboy state. But that's not the interesting part. In 1970, Hank Roan helped open Cajon High School. He pushed to include the cowboy mascot. Why? You see, Hank Roan on the GI Bill earned his BA and MA in education at the University of Wyoming in the late 40s. He went on to coach in Wyoming in Torrington, Casper, and Riverton. Why is this important for this bill? Hank, like many teachers, brought a certain culture and climate to an institution. This culture is vitally essential to the success of community and its students. I am not here in opposition of this bill to save bad teachers. I'm here to save the fabric of institutions, which include teachers, coaches, parents, and students alike. When legislation diminishes teachers to at-will employees, it undermines the culture and climate of the community's institutions. I'll stand for questions.
okay. Any questions? Thank you very much, sir. Who wants to be next? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, you have to know that I'm used to talking to 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds. So I am Rebay Smith. I am the current Campbell County Teacher of the Year and also a fifth grade teacher. So I have some perspective on, just to give you some perspective on teacher evaluations and the word tenure. I started my career not in Wyoming, and once I got to Wyoming, I'm like, this is absolutely amazing. One thing that I do notice that is different is our kids every single day, they deserve a teacher that is highly effective, not just every 3 years someone sees them do that. And so I know that there's been kind of a skewed view on what public education looks like. I would say that anybody has a little bit of a skewed view. Come on into our classrooms and you will see that most teachers are already doing this. Most teachers are already using data for their instruction. They are already craving feedback. They are wanting people in their rooms. Where I teach in Campbell County, we actually have peer feedback processes in order where we give each other feedback so that it's not just all on our principal. And so looking at this, like I said, I'm used to teaching cute little 10-year-olds. When I see this minimum once every 3 years, the first thing that I think of is our kids deserve this every single year. And so I know that there are people being evaluated every single year. Just know that as a teacher and as educators in general, we are not expecting a free pass just because we are effective for 2 years. We would never expect. And if there are teachers that expect that, I would definitely be questioning their purpose in education. We expect our kids to grow each year. We expect our kids to goal set every year. We expect our kids to show proficiency every year. And I think that we should expect that from our teachers every year also. So I know the word tenure kind of gets people a little riled up. But when I look at it, I really look at what are we doing to ensure that we're supporting teachers to be able to make sure that they're effective so that our kids can be proficient and effective also. If you've ever had to teach after a year of a not effective teacher, this rings true to you because you know how hard it is after a year, 2 years, or 3 years to bring those babies back. And so I would say not only just know that from our perspective, we are naturally reflective. We want to be evaluated, and we want people to see why we are effective or proficient on whatever standard we're working towards. So with that, I will stand for any questions.
Questions? Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciate it. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
My name is Dan Parson. I am the Sweetwater County School District Number 2 Teacher of the Year, a 33-year teaching veteran.
Which county?
Pardon me?
Which county?
Sweetwater 2.
Sweetwater 2.
And I'm a member of the Speech and Debate Coaching Hall of Fame. Coached that for 20 years. So I helped a lot of students do this sort of thing, and now I'm going to give it a shot. Pardon me, ma'am?
We might need a point or two.
I don't know. I got my first job in inner city Chicago 33 years ago. I took a 1-year contract, and with the understanding that I would be replacing a teacher named Ralph Sweeney. He's long gone. And Mr. Sweeney would videotape himself teaching his first class, and then he would play that videotape all day and sit in the back science storage room and smoke. So Mr. Sweeney left the teaching profession long before he actually left the building. Yeah. I agree that we need mechanisms for sure to address that sort of situation. But as my friend just said, those are exceptions. That is not the rule. So I do stand opposed to this legislation for 2 reasons. Number one, I believe it is far easier, the principals that I know I think would agree with me, it is far easier to help a non-performing teacher than to replace one. We have a teacher shortage. I believe this legislation sends a bad message to young people who want to come into the profession. Secondly, I worry that this legislation could sort of open the door to abuse of teachers by evaluators, others, school boards who maybe don't like their political views or who are coaching and not winning enough for the community or any other number of reasons that they might want to label somebody non-performing. I worry about that term and the definition of non-performing. Anyway, I hope that you all will take that into consideration. Thank you for your time, and I stand now for questions. Thanks.
Any questions? Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Chairman and Board. My name is Jennifer Palacios, and I'm an administrator in Sweetwater 1 from Rock Springs. And I will tell you, it is my job as an administrator not to let said teachers stay in the school. And I take that very, very seriously. We're a right-to-work state. So whether my teachers have tenure or not is an expectation in Sweetwater 1 and at Stagecoach Elementary, where I'm from. It's my job to ensure that they are performing where they need to perform. And if they are not, we do have things in place. It is my job to coach them, to put them on a contract to improve, and to get that documentation, and to prove that they've had the opportunity to get better with coaching, that I've been in their room, I've offered them to see other things, and I can very well have a teacher leave my building. I don't need a bill to tell me that I can just fire them at any point in time. And I have been an administrator when we've had to move teachers. Just because they're new, they don't leave. I go based off of performance and performance of data and performance of culture within the school. Because our kids are more than robots too. They're more than data. And some are never, ever going to be proficient on what we'd say Y top, but they're going to be one heck of a community person and in trades. So it's my job to ensure that my teachers, paras, staff in general, are living up to their expectations. And I take that role very seriously, and I can tell you that the majority of principals do, and if they don't, then that's up to their superintendent to get rid of the principal. I stand for any questions.
Any questions? Let me ask you one. You said you use data. What data do you use?
Oh goodness, I can open a world to you. We use, okay, so in Sweetwater 1, we don't use FastBridge, we use Acadians. So that's a form of fluency and phonemic awareness, because I'm K3. So I'll use that data to see how our kids are reading. I will also use YTOP, interims, authoring tool tests, but then we've also, over the past couple of years, my staff has been very good about going through the letters training, and we've made reading data walls, and we look at the PASI and PSI, which are skills within reading. We are also getting one ready for math currently through my vertical articulation teams with my teachers, and we look at the student progression. So I'm looking for growth. And we want to see every kid grow. So we might have a child who comes in very, very red, which means below basic, and they may leave orange, but that's still red. But they grew by 100, they grew a year and a half worth of growth. So we're looking at that consistently to see the growth that's happening with those children. And then when a new class comes in, if I'm still seeing a dip in scores, I meet with that teacher. And so, for instance, I have a veteran teacher that I got from another building. Last year we cried, I'm not gonna lie, when we saw the YTOP scores. I was like, oh. This year, we took the winter interims. Projection looks okay as long as her kids grow. But if her kids dip like they did last year, we're in trouble again. That teacher and I are meeting every 3 weeks. We're going over the authoring tools test that they give every week to 2 weeks to check on their reading and math and writing. I look at her goal setting that she's doing with the kids, and we do a data reflection as well. She's also going to see her peers who have much higher scores. And we do that every 3 weeks. And I'm in her room once a week to do observations minimum.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Who wants to be next? Anybody? Going once, going twice? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Allison Robertson, and I am the Natrona County Teacher of the Year for this school year. I teach in a high school setting, and one of the things that causes me concern is when we talk about education, we talk about teacher shortage, subs shortage, we've talked about building concerns, we've talked about opening new schools when we have a shortage of teachers, and now we're talking about legislature that could be perceived as not trusting our teachers. And I know that you had suggested that we don't trust taxpayers to make good decisions, but when we cause legislature that makes the exception the rule instead of taking into account where people are just trying to do the right thing, I think you unintentionally come across as not for education. My concern is that who are we replacing these people with? I know the first human that spoke suggested that we're going to get a new teacher, and where? When we look at applications, we need to do more growing teachers that we currently have in the system because we just don't have the applications coming in. And so I think unintentionally working on the exceptions instead of trying to help support our teachers and get better at their job, I think we're causing ourselves to shoot metaphorically ourselves in the foot and potentially causing problems in the next few years instead of investing in what we have, providing resources for what they have, and giving us a better opportunity to do our jobs correctly. With that, I stand for questions.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Anybody else? Anybody else? Once, going twice. Public testimony is closed. Back on the bill. Do I hear a motion? Bill has been moved. Any discussion, any amendments, any discussion? Seeing none? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senate File 95, teacher tenure. Senator Brightman. Senator Brennan.
Aye.
Senator Rothfuss has left an absentee vote of no. Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Scott.
No.
3 aye, 2 no.
Okay, that completes our work committee. Next time we meet, it will be House bills. Ashley, do we have any House bills assigned yet?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you have 2 assigned to your committee.
Okay, what are they?
They are House Bill 20, School Finance Regional Cost Adjustment Study, and House Bill 21, Engrossed Charter School Leasing.